As a gamer, one has lots of things, whether it be console controllers, RGB lit keyboards and mouses, or special chairs even. There's plenty to accumulate, but some of it really has no use. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 most useless things to have as a gamer. So starting off at number 10, Steam points. In the intro, I mentioned some physical objects that are useful, but Steam points are the exact opposite. They are a nebulous, abstract thing that, how many of them do you have right now? You have no idea, do you? No, you don't. Well, maybe some of you do, but the vast majority don't. They barely remember that Steam points exist, let alone how many one has. These things are so pointless and deeply buried in menus that I struggled to find where I could even view them. So you gotta go to the profile edit screen and then this Steam point store button to actually find the thing where you can use points. Like, it's so buried it might as well not exist for most people. Then again, a lot of people probably don't even know you have a viewable Steam profile with experience and levels and everything. Like, that's a pretty useless thing to have. Steam levels. I guess if you get satisfaction from a number going up, then wow, great. But otherwise, this is not really much of a purpose. At least with Steam points, you can, I guess, buy stuff for your profile. It's not much, but I guess it's technically something. The main reason this is such a useless feature is it's deep in menus and pretty unnecessary. At least with Steam cards, you can sell them for a few cents a piece, but you can't get much, if anything, from these things at all. The funniest use I've seen for points is to give lame or obnoxious avatars and pictures to people as a way to troll them. That's pretty much the only purpose I've ever seen that even makes any kind of sense. They're a thing that we kind of remember during the major Steam holiday sales and just immediately forget about the rest of the year. At number 9 is the Bethesda Launcher. Remember when every publisher was going launcher crazy? It seems like everybody wanted their own storefront to compete with Steam, but for the most part, nobody ever made a dent. The Bethesda Launcher was one of the most ill-conceived, pointless, and unwanted, stupid versions of this, and it obviously barely had any games on it. However, if you wanted to play certain Bethesda games at launch on PC, you had to have it. I think the only game that launched exclusively on Bethesda Launcher was Fallout 76, and that eventually moved over to Steam, but you still had to go through the annoying process of signing into the game through the Bethesda account if you wanted to go online in certain games. So basically, it was annoying and now it's dead. The whole service is shutting down permanently May 11th, which I'm not complaining about at all. At least they're doing it right and making it so all the games you've bought on Bethesda Launcher can be migrated over to Steam. But with the closure and the Steam migration, it basically makes the launcher itself completely redundant, at least more completely redundant than it was during its lifespan, I guess. I mean, it's been completely redundant the whole time. The funniest thing about this whole situation is you can still download the launcher if you want, at least at the time of writing. So at the moment, you can still buy games for a launcher that in a very short period of time is going to become completely obsolete. It was a launcher that most people didn't want when it was supported, and now it's not supported, so it's totally useless. At number 8 is Wii Sports and Switch Sports accessories. The Nintendo Wii saw this deluge of useless plastic crap they sold for it. There was an almost endless supply of junk you could buy to attach to the Wiimote. Some of it kind of fun and useful, like the gun thing, but most of it being totally superfluous junk. Maybe the most pointless of all Wii accessories were those things that you could buy for Wii Sports. Like, they didn't really do anything, they're just plastic shells you could put the Wiimote into. And I guess the point was to make the experience feel more real or something. I don't know how attaching a cheap plastic paddle to your controller makes it feel more like you're playing table tennis, but whatever. You'd think that this stuff wouldn't really be worth making anymore either, but the Switch Sports stuff is just doing it all over again. With this version, you get like an extra leg and some wrist straps, and they serve a purpose at least, but everything else is the same old junk of questionable utility. At least those Wii Sports things were fairly cheap. The Switch stuff costs like $50 for the whole thing. $50 for a few plastic pieces that add nothing to the game. Like, you could nearly get another Pro controller for that. At number 7 is Ghost Recon Breakpoint NFT guns. Yeah, Ubisoft's ill-fated venture into the NFT marketplace hasn't exactly been warmly received by the gaming community. It started off by offering special NFT guns and cosmetics for Ghost Recon Breakpoint using their new NFT platform called Quartz, which, sounds like the absolute best idea on the outside, but it's just the execution. No, it's just sounded like a bad idea from the start. Seriously, who's even talking about Ghost Recon Breakpoint still in 2022? For one, people were pretty cold on the game when it came out back in 2019, even though they managed to earn back a little bit of goodwill by constantly updating and improving it in the intervening years. It's kind of fundamentally flawed and never managed to reach a bigger audience. But the whole point of NFTs is that they're unique. You could potentially get something that's valuable and sell it later for a profit. At the very least, you'd think that the unique weapon you'd get would be something truly unique to justify the price tag, but the Ghost Recon NFT weapons were just generic guns with a random skin on them that didn't really stand out in any way. So the whole thing was pretty lame from the start, but now Ubisoft ending support for Ghost Recon Breakpoint entirely really makes these NFT weapons pointless, because clearly the publisher has no interest in keeping the game going, which is only going to shrink the player base more, and in turn that's going to make the NFTs more worthless than they already are. What happens when Ubisoft shuts down the game's server? Or if they give up on Quartz entirely? Like, there's no central server to house the NFT, so it's basically just a broken link. Almost nobody actually got any of these things, so nobody's really losing money on it, except maybe Ubisoft. The NFT guns are so worthless that not even normally credulous NFT lovers were interested. That's, pretty impressive on its own. And number 6 is an empty Nintendo Switch box. Now, this is a little more specific, but follow along with me here. Certain Nintendo Switch physical games has this big banner on them that says full game download, no game card included, and they're not joking. You open up the box and there is nothing inside except for a code, making the actual thing you bought a plastic box. There's only 2 reasons to have one of these boxes: to hold a game or to display in your collection. Maybe there's a third option, but those are the primary reasons to own a physical game box. What's so bad about these is that they're kind of terrible for both of those reasons. The first, obvious, there's no game card in the box, so once you use the code, you don't really need to hold anything in the box. The second, to use it for display. It's also bad with these things because, look at the big hideous white banner on them. They look terrible compared to the standard Switch boxes, so displaying them doesn't hit the same way. Once you use the code inside, the boxes are literally one of the most useless things of all time. Just a hunk of plastic. At least with the Wii and Switch peripherals, you can still attach them to things, but not this. You can hold a used code in it. Other than that, it's literally just a piece of trash. But people keep them anyway for whatever reason. And number 5 are lifetime subscriptions to MMOs. Remember this? For a little while in the mid-2000s, when everybody was trying to get some of that World of Warcraft and EverQuest money, a ton of MMOs came out with what looked like an awesome deal. Instead of paying a monthly fee, you could buy a lifetime subscription that would let you play the game forever, subscription free. For many of these games, the price was right. The lifetime sub cost around 2 years of game time, so if you're going to play this game for the long haul, it would be totally worth it. Not a lot of these games managed to last that long, though. Almost every game that offered a lifetime sub either died soon or switched to free to play, so that money you're supposed to save, not much of an issue anymore. Star Trek Online went free to play 2 years after it originally came out. DC Universe Online lost its mandatory subs only 9 months later. Secret World only managed to last about 5 months before dropping subs, so those lifetime subscriptions didn't end up being worth hardly anything. One of the most infamous of these things was this one offered for Hellgate London, a game like most people probably barely even remember, but it had a $150 lifetime subscription for a game that was barely an online game in the first place. The game came out on Halloween 2007, then the entire development studio closed and stopped charging subscriptions in July 2008. So while it managed to last longer than the Secret World, the fact that the game was barely even an MMO makes the whole subscription scheme even more useless. Maybe there are some games out there that did offer decent lifetime subscriptions. I don't really know. Not exactly out hunting for them. But if there's one thing useless to have as a gamer, it's a lifetime subscription to a game that ended up costing more than if you subscribed on a monthly basis instead. And number 4 is the Ouya. In 2022, it kind of feels cruel to make fun of the Ouya, the Android-based console that was meant as an alternative to the supposedly stale and repetitive console experiences of the time. That was back in 2013, nearly more than a decade ago. And while this thing got a certain amount of attention at the time, it never really managed to be a success in a big way. When we say that having one of these things is useless, we don't mean because it's a bad system, because you can turn it on and you can even emulate games on it, but if you want to use any of the services or apps on the platform, you can't. The company that eventually bought the rights to Ouya, Razer, totally discontinued online accounts and support for the platform in 2019. That means apps like Netflix are unusable, you can't access your account. If you attempt to update the system, it just loads forever. Like, even the web browser doesn't work. Obviously, the storefront and all the developer stuff no longer functions anymore as well. So this thing is basically a brick that can be used as a kind of crappy emulation box. Here's the thing too, portable and micro consoles have gotten really popular in the last few years. Like, if you're looking for a device for emulation, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of better options in both build quality and functionality. We're talking about a machine that came out in 2013. It was kind of the first of its kind and didn't quite nail anything about it. So in 2022, this thing is more useful as a paperweight than a gaming console. At number 3, an unmodded original Xbox console. At least with the Ouya, you can play some old emulator games, but if you've got an unmodded original Xbox, it's worse. It's basically just a paperweight, and wow, is it a big, ugly paperweight. But there's nothing you can do with it. Why? There is a design flaw. On pretty much every console except for the 1.6 model, Microsoft used a cheap capacitor to power the clock when the console's off. For the first decade, really wasn't that big of a deal, but after a while, people who owned the console started to realize that the capacitor would start to corrode, and the acid inside would actually eventually spill out onto the motherboard, which would permanently damage it and render the console useless. Now, every console starts to struggle after a few years. It's just the nature of hardware to start to break down after a while, but for the most part, these worn or broken parts can be fixed. That said, if the motherboard's damaged, you're pretty much screwed. All you have is a big, and when I say big, keep in mind how big that original Xbox was, a big brick. Many of my old consoles still work. I have a PS2, I have a Super Nintendo, and Nintendo 64, but that Xbox died, I assume for this exact reason. Back in 2018, people were saying that pretty much every non-modded Xbox would probably be on its last legs. And now in 2022, that's all but certain if you've got an original Xbox that hasn't been fixed or modded in some way. In fact, the motherboard's probably damaged beyond repair. And number 2 is the Hipshot Dot. Let's move on from the grim reminder that everything will eventually break down and die. Instead, just talk about some goofy shit. The Hipshot Dot is a little red LED light attached to a suction cup. You were supposed to put it on the center of your screen so you could shoot accurately from the hip in FPS games. You know, the Counter-Strike dot trick for a new millennium. And while the Counter-Strike trick cost the price of a marker and some clear tape, this cost, and I'm serious, $30 for literally an LED light attached to a suction cup and a USB cord. What's especially ridiculous about this thing is that it doesn't even work effectively for games it's supposedly made for. Almost every FPS game at the time had some form of bullet bloom, so you're obviously not going to get perfectly accurate shots at the center of your screen anyways. The trick doesn't even work in Counter-Strike anymore. It used to be pretty useful back when the AWP was pretty accurate no-scope, but that's not the case now. The whole thing adds nothing to the experience of playing a game and barely helps people trying to use it to cheat. When your $30 gaming product is less useful than $1 worth of stickers, maybe you should rethink your business model. And finally, at number 1, a vertical keyboard with rear view mirrors. Yeah, just look at this thing. It is a supposedly ergonomic keyboard that, according to the Amazon listing, is the only one that can place the user in a completely orthopedically neutral position. And what they mean by that is that the two sides of the keyboard are facing straight up, and somehow you have to use this. Like, it looks uncomfortable to use, not comfortable, not ergonomic. And the fact there's a bunch of buttons in the middle makes even less sense. Like, how are you supposed to type quickly with this in any way? Like, the Amazon listing lists it as, like, ideal for data entry, which seems totally absurd. But if you were to use this for gaming, and I know some people who have, it would just be totally nuts. You rely on 2 mirrors to see the keys on the keyboard because, let's just be clear, you don't have muscle memory that makes this thing work, period. The whole thing is just a mess. It's one of the most insane input devices I've ever seen. When your keyboard is making junk like the Power Glove look usable, there's a problem. Like, I didn't think it was possible to screw up a keyboard this badly, but they found a way. And some gamers out there likely just thought, challenge accepted. I'm willing to bet this keyboard bested them though. That's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.